Southland, as one heart we bring.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce this session this afternoon. I'm Leanne Perry, the Deputy Chair of the National Catholic Education Commission and Executive Director of the Queensland Catholic Education Commission. And it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker this afternoon on a topic which is of importance to each one of us, which is the safeguarding of the young people in our care. And I'm delighted to introduce to you Robert Fitzgerald AM. Robert was a Commissioner on the Royal Commission into Institutional Responses to Child Sexual Abuse. He was also formerly a Commissioner with the Productivity Commission and the inaugural Chair of the Advisory Board for the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission. He is currently New South Wales Ageing and Disability Commissioner. There's much more I could say about Robert, but he encouraged me not to say it. But other than he is an expert in this area, he has been heavily involved with Catholic organisations as well, so brings a great depth of experience and understanding to this topic. Please welcome Robert Fitzgerald.
Well, good afternoon, and I must say it's an incredible joy for us to be together, for me to be with you, I should really say, and after 6 long years, it's terrific. I must say I was very worried about how did I follow Jordan. In fact, nobody follows Jordan, and I was very pleased that superannuation fell between the two of us, because it utterly brings us back down to earth. And so I'm very grateful for Uni Super and Catholic superannuation. I'd also like I'll put a plug in to say thank you very much to those who have been supportive of Caritas Australia. I've been chair only for a couple of years, and last night it was great to be able to meet with those in the education system right around Australia who have been such long-time supporters of Caritas Australia, and we're forever grateful for that, and we'll continue to ask for your support. But today we talk about safeguarding. Gosh, how many people want to talk about safeguarding at 4:30 on an afternoon? I suspect not too many, but the truth of the matter is this is core business, and it's core business in every institution that deals with children around Australia, and it's core business if you're Catholic. There is nothing more important than the way in which we treat those that are most vulnerable in our community, whether they're children or women or older people, and in my current job it's older people and people with disability. But it's been a year in which I've been involved often with parts of your sector. Earlier in the year, I was up in Toowoomba, where it was a safeguarding day for Catholic schools and Catholic leaders. In the middle of the year, I was on Zoom with Sandhurst Diocese in relation to their Catholic leadership in schools programs. Recently, I was here in Melbourne, and I was with the Edmund Rice Education Association, or Australia, in relation to a day on safeguarding concerning online safety issues for children. And today I'm with you, and in a short time I'll be with Mercy Education. So it seems to be a year in which safeguarding and the Catholic school system is very much at the fore of those discussions. At the Edmund Rice Education Australia Forum, they had a similar presentation of young people talking about their views about safety, online safety. And I was reminded as a parent there are 3 or 4 stages. The first stage is that children think you are infallible. You know everything. Isn't it a wonderful stage? By about mid-primary, late primary, they're starting to see the dents in this facade, and they start to doubt a little bit what you're saying, but they've still got a bit of faith in you. By the time they get to middle teenagers, you not only have to learn a new language called grunting, but you actually have to realise that they don't believe you know anything at all. But that's not the most terrifying part. The most terrifying part is when you actually realise what they're saying, it makes sense, and they know more than you do. And in a sense, we've seen that today. And at the Edmund Rice thing, we also saw that they knew a great deal more than I could ever know about online safety and the dangers of that. So the thing today, which is so impressive to me, is that this conference is The Future is Listening. Isn't that an extraordinary thing? Because out of the Royal Commission 5 years ago, the most important lesson we learnt, of all the lessons that we learnt, and there were many, was simply, what if we had listened to children? What if we had deeply and profoundly listened to children and young people? What if we had listened to children and young people as they were adults coming back to us to tell us what had happened? And our failure to do so led to such great harm for them and for us, for the church and for institutions generally. And so the future absolutely is about listening intently. But it's also about something else. Australians will be confronted with the most important listening exercise that they've ever confronted. That is the call for the voice to Parliament, the response to the Uluru Statement from the Heart. And it will be a measure of each of us and the nation as to whether or not we genuinely believe in listening, deeply listening and responding to what we have heard. But there's another thing, that in that statement of the Statement of the Heart, there is this particular line which talks about the torment of the powerless, the torment of the powerless. And in many senses, in the area of safeguarding of vulnerable children and vulnerable adults, we deal with that very issue of powerlessness. In the Uluru Statement of the Heart, it's about the fact that Aboriginal people for so long and Torres Strait Islander peoples for so long have had little power in the structures and systems that shape their destinies. And it's asking us to do something different. But so too in relation to sexual and other abuse that we see. And let me just put to you some circumstances that arose from the Royal Commission in very simple terms. I did a private session with a family. There were two children. The children at the time that they were in the private session were in Year 6 and Year 10, and the parents were there. Both children had been abused for a number of years by the primary school principal of an independent school. I want you to think about the power and the loss of power for those children and how what you've done in the last 5 years would affect that situation. A second was two teachers, married. Both had been abused as children, were now teachers in the Catholic education system, having been abused within the Catholic Church. And they relate to the fact that in the 3 or 4 years that the Royal Commission had been going at the time of this private session, their school had had not one in-service training in relation to child sexual abuse. And the reason was that the principal had had a relative who had been accused of sexual abuse. What's the power situation of those two teachers in that school to speak up, to demand something different? And how would the systems and the governance you have in place now make a difference? And thirdly, there was a board member of a Catholic prestigious school, and he had been abused. And when people started to come forward indicating their abuse in the past and seeking redress and restitution from the church, what was the board's reaction? The old boys did exactly what old boys do. And the first thing they say is, it didn't happen to me, therefore it didn't happen. The second is, well, even if it did happen, these victims are always after the money. They're trying to bring down the church. They're trying to extract redress from us. The third is, irrespective of all of that, the reputation is more important for our sons and daughters at this school, or sons. What else? What is the power situation for that board member, having suffered abuse, now sitting with other board members? And that response that I've given to you happened over and over and over and over again throughout Australia. Because in a sense, safeguarding is a simple concept. We've made it too complex in a sense. It's a very simple concept, and it starts with you. And it's simply this: do you believe that children and vulnerable people have the right to live free of abuse, of harassment, of intimidation, of sexual abuse? And if you believe that, then we find the way to try to minimise the risks for those people. And in a sense, you'd say, of course we believe that. But the truth of the matter is, in many institutions around Australia, they were not safe. And the conduct of others at those institutions showed that even if they conceptually believed that, in practice they gave no real strength to that conviction. But the second thing about safeguarding is giving voice and agency to children and to vulnerable people generally. Today you saw Jordan. Jordan's thing was all about agency. It was allowing children to have voice, to give expression to their creativity and imagination, and then to react and allow it to happen. And so too in safeguarding. Safeguarding is about giving voice and presence, giving agency to those that are most vulnerable and most at risk. And so safeguarding is not complex, but it does have these two elements. As leaders, does your governance and the culture of your schools not only embrace the very simple notion, but fundamental one, that every child in that institution has the right to live free of abuse, to live safely, but does it also embrace the notion that they have agency? They have the capacity to have voice and presence, both in the policies and the decisions that affect them. Because at the end of the day, that's what safeguarding is about. For you, in sense, it's not a question, because right throughout Australia, the mandatory child safety standards require you, as an institution at all levels, to in fact hear the voice of children. How will that happen on the National Commission? How will that happen on the diocesan and state education commissions? How will those voices be heard at the school boards and management committees? How will they be heard by the leadership and the staff of the schools? Because it's no longer a request, it's a requirement. And now it's about us finding ways to give voice and presence to the issues that children wish to raise. But most importantly, agency is a protective factor. One of the things that has dramatically changed in Australia has been our capacity to educate children with age-appropriate education that actually enables them to, in fact, in some way, have agency over the things that are happening to them. Never must we go to the point of putting the blame or the responsibility on children and young people. That would be indefensible. But it is true, if we are to protect our children and the children in your schools, then in fact we need to give them the capacity to be able to somewhat understand what is happening and, where appropriate, to be able to resist that occurring. But listening is only listening if it has an intent to it. And so what is the listening that we're requiring of you and me every day? This is not a passive listening, where in fact we listen and we do nothing. That's not what this is about. So let's go back to the time of 540 AD, of Benedict of Nursia, when he said in the very first thing, the Benedictine rules that govern monastic life even through today, it was to listen with the ear of the heart. Not to listen, but to listen with the ear of the heart. And so we, both as Catholics, as educators, as people in institutions, as board members or as principals or as teachers or as administrative staff, have this responsibility to listen with the ear of the heart. And that has many interpretations, particularly those in monastic life. But for me, what would it mean? It means that we listen firstly with compassion. Compassion was so not there when so many people experienced abuse in our own systems in the past, and even less so when they came forward to disclose it as adults. Listening with the heart surely has at its fundamental that we listen with a compassion and a concern and a care and even a kindness. But I think it's more than that. It's about open listening. That is, you are open to the possibility it is true. I was giving a speech the other day to the national decision makers in the National Redress Scheme. They are the ones that determine whether or not a payment should be made by institutions, including yours, to victims that have come forward in the National Redress Scheme. And my opening point was that you have to approach this with the openness to the possibility of it being true. So often teachers, principals, boards, and I even suspect commissions fail to do that. That is not to say you accept it as true. That is not to say that there shouldn't be a proper and due investigation and consideration, because there are many cases where in fact it is not true. And in education, you will tell me about those. Every gathering of priests, of brothers, of nuns, of teachers, in all sorts of schools, the very first question I generally get asked is, well, what about the cases that weren't true? Sure. But what about the many, many cases that were? The second is, and it is a confronting one, is your opinion doesn't matter, but your judgment does. In this space, your opinion gets in the way of acting justly and fairly. And so often what we saw in our education school, in our systems, but also in our institutions, is that immediately that you hear of a particular allegation, you will form a view. And that view will be either of these four. Either that it couldn't possibly be the case, he's a wonderful man or she's a wonderful woman, and it's not possible. Second is that he or she, the victim, are always making up stories. They're always having on, particular, shaming events or trying to, bring discredit to a particular person. The third will be you're not sure, and the last one will be, I always thought there was something funny about that person, he's absolutely as guilty as sin. All of which lead you down the wrong course. And so it's a space where all of us, no matter what our personal opinions are, it's actually the objective judgment that matters. The one thing I've learned about sexual abuse is I can't convince you, and I won't even try, about whether or not a person did or didn't do something. It's beyond my capacity to change your mind. Having formed a view, it's only those in the third category, those that are not sure, that ever change it. So putting that aside, we say, well, irrespective of your opinion and your view, what are the processes that you will follow? And so this is a strange place where I can say to you, honestly, process is your friend. Procedures are your friend. Procedural fairness for the person who is alleged to have been the abuser, for the child and or family or adult that claims to have been abused, all of this is about procedure and procedural fairness that should be put in place. Previously, what would happen is a couple of things. A principal would form a view, and then they would distort the investigation. They wouldn't do it thoroughly, or in fact, they would form an investigation which tried to prove the guilt of the person. But other opinions mattered. We did an inquiry into a school for children with disabilities. And what happened there was that this was child-on-child sexual behaviours. And the principal and the supervising teacher over the classroom teacher didn't like the classroom teacher. So when the classroom teacher highlighted in very great detail what was occurring, and it was inappropriate behaviour, it wasn't sexual abuse because it was the same age, it was ignored. But worse than that, both the principal and the supervising teacher tried to discredit the teacher. Of course, in the evidence before the commission and in the public hearing, the teacher was 100% right. And there was another case of opinion about the teacher and their like and dislike got in the way of the protection of the child, or in this case, two children, both the child that was acting out and the child upon whom it was being acted. And so again, opinion is not relevant, but judgment is. A third one is the responsive listening, and that is to actually act. Pope Francis has added a new dimension to this. It used to be see, reflect and act. I think it used to have earlier be see, judge and act. But he said, no, it's see, reflect, choose and act. So listening to children, listening to vulnerable people, is there a call for you to act, see, reflect and understand, to choose and then to act in a wise way. And so again, at commission levels, at national and state and diocesan levels, at board levels, at management level, how do we reflect that in every one of our meetings, every one of our considerations? And are we up for the task that I've just indicated? See, reflect, choose, and then act. But I've indicated to you that this is core business, absolutely core business. And so I just want to use Caritas for a moment for an example. When I became chair of Caritas, it was extraordinary to me that the emphasis on safeguarding that existed in that organisation. The first thing is in relation to the accreditation by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Caritas, because it's an international humanitarian organisation, has several accrediting processes, including that. The one thing the board is quizzed on and the leadership team is quizzed on and cannot fail is safeguarding. It is the only red line. If you fail, the board and or the leadership of the organisation is unable to articulate what they're doing in safeguarding, and that is not saying, oh, we've got a policy, there it is on the shelf and it's got a lot of dust on it. You'll fail. Red line. But extraordinarily there, it's not only that, it's the safeguarding of the staff, volunteers and visitors that operate in Australia, and every country that we have a partnership with, which is nearly 20 countries, their staff, their volunteers, their visitors. And it's not safeguarding of children, it's safeguarding of vulnerable groups, which often includes very vulnerable women and other people. How do you have a safeguarding regime that goes beyond not only the country, but into the partner agencies? And yet that's the case. Every board meeting, the safeguarding report is the second or third report, without fail. Every single board meeting, safeguarding, not as part of a risk management strategy, is separate. Every board member, every staff member, every volunteer in the organisation is required to undertake some online training in relation to a whole range of issues concerning safeguarding, including not only sexual abuse, but harassment, discrimination, and so forth. And so there is a way by which we operationalise it. And it is what has to happen. And sometimes there's nothing much to report, thank goodness. And other times there's very severe matters to be reporting. A second thing about core business at government level is that surely acting in the best interests of children and others is in the best interests of the organisation. I was giving a speech a couple of years ago to all of the independent schools in South Australia, and there would have been some Catholic schools there. And at the end of the presentation, a woman got up and she'd been recently appointed as a director on an independent school, and she'd recently done the Australian Institute of Company Directors course. And she said to me, we've been taught all about best interest, and now you're telling us we have to act in the best interest of children. And I said to her, you surely can't come to the view that acting in the best interest of children is antithetical to acting in the best interest of the institution, of the company. But her question was insightful, because many of the boards, many of our commissions have lost sight of the true notion of best interest. They seem to have constrained it to both a financial and risk management approach, devoid of understanding of the context within which we operate, and devoid of the understanding that, in fact, protecting the vulnerable, if you're in the business of working with the vulnerable, is core business. It goes to the very best interests of the organisation. And yet, even in our Catholic Church, we find areas where that has been subjugated to a narrow and, I think, legalistic, but even worse than that, I think an almost uncaring response to the notion of best interest. And yet if I were to say that to a board, or any board, they would reject it almost instantly. But the truth is, it's there. But the other one is this, and that is the very core of our social ethics, the social teachings of the Church, has at its heart a very interesting notion. It has the notion of dignity. Everyone in this room, wherever you are in your journey in terms of your faith and your connectedness to the Catholic Church, would absolutely be wedded to the social teachings of the Catholic Church, as I am. And in the core, it's about the dignity of person. But I heard an interpretation of that the other day by a mercy nun on another board that I'm on. And it was that the very essence of our social teaching is that there is no spare people. There are no spare people. There are no disposable people. And I put it to you very much that there are no disposable children. There are no spare children. And yet when we look back at the way in which we have treated some children that were abused, and as adults, the only conclusion to come to is that dignity was reserved for some, but not for all. And so in a sense, in your schools, in your education facilities, in the commissions that you run and operate, are we sure that there are no spare children? Are we sure that there are no disposable children? Let me give you a practical example of that. There are three emerging issues, and I'll just touch on briefly. But the first one is problematic child sexual behaviours. Let me make one comment. It's very clear that there has been a reduction in the level of abuse within institutions by adults. But I'll put a caveat on that in one moment, and that's terrific. Because of all the work that you and others have done, all that we have done has made a difference. There's no doubt about that. And the greatest level of abuse of children remains, as it always has, in the family home. But one area that is emerging is, of course, problematic child behaviours. And in this space, there can be peer on peer, child same age on child, or it can be an older child on a younger child. And one of the challenges here is that we know with absolute certainty that most children that abuse other children as children do not go on to be abusers later in life. We know that, but some do. But we also know that one of the most important things to ensure that the child doesn't go on to become an abuser later on is stability. Stability in the family and stability in the educational setting. Yet the truth of the matter is, in most of our institutions, the moment it is revealed that a child has inappropriately sexually behaved towards another child, there will be this automatic view the child has to be removed. Maybe that's right. But if we're actually talking about the child's well-being, both children, but including the one that's acted out, that may be absolutely contrary to the best interests of that child and actually predetermine a path that none of us would choose. These are not easy questions, and the parent community will not help you, because most of the parents in Catholic and independent schools will talk about the good of the majority. Well, really what they're saying is the good of my son and daughter. As a parent who had 3 children go through the Catholic schools, I probably have that view too. But it's not the view that a leader can have. And it's not a view that people that are absolutely wedded to the social ethics and social teachings can hold. The second one is the online exploitation. There is no doubt at all that there is a growth in the level of exploitation taking place on online. We, again, listening to children during the Royal Commission and subsequently, we've talked to children. I was actually chaired a forum of children in Darwin. I did a forum of children in out-of-home care. The Australian Catholic University did research for us. And what we do know is that children believe they have a right to the use of online access, as we've heard, and they value it and they see it as important, and I share that view. But they were also equally aware of the dangers, and they wanted to know what they were. They wanted to know what would make them safe and what would make them unsafe. They wanted to understand, the dangers that lurked within the particular accesses, that the cyberspace that they're accessing. But it was very interesting. They were able to tell us what they would listen to, what are the messages that would matter, and most importantly, who they would listen to and who they wouldn't. And it won't surprise you that they won't listen to me, they don't listen to police officers, and they probably don't listen to most of you. But they do want to listen and understand. And the only way we're going to come to grips with that is if we listen to them. But my point about online is be very careful. There are 2 things we don't know. We don't know whether those that would otherwise have been abusers in person have moved to the online environment and subsequently will abuse. We simply don't know. And in the Catholic Church itself, we don't know. It's more likely that there are new abusers and different types, but we simply don't know. The second thing is this, and that is, when I say we don't know, that's probably wrong. The attitudes of men have not changed. So whilst the incidence of abuse has reduced because of all the things we do to limit opportunity within schools, the one thing that is clear is that the attitudes of men have not changed. There is no evidence whatsoever that there are fewer men who have an ideation to abuse children in any setting at all. And we haven't been able to change those. So in schools, the things that stop it is you reduce the opportunity. You increase the opportunity for disclosure. You increase the understanding of grooming. And other teachers and other workers are more likely to raise issues of concern. Parents are more informed and children have more agency. All of that matters. But if there was a change in the attitude of men who are likely to offend, we would have seen a deep reduction in the number of children in homes that are being abused, and there is no reduction. We would see a reduction in the level of domestic violence, particularly spouses but children, and we see no reduction. We would see a decline in harassment and discrimination in the workplace, and reduction in that. So again, when all have any problems, we haven't had a report for a while, that's good. Is because it's not happening and we don't, or then I would actually say be very cautious. And the last emerging problem is complacency. Complacency by you and I. I know from talking to people last night that some of you are over-safeguarding. I'm sure that's true. Some of you believe that in some of the parishes, dioceses, schools and environments, they've gone too far. And perhaps that's true too. The pendulum does swing too far. And what we have to do is to find a midpoint by learning, by understanding, by listening. But the worst thing we can do is if we can become complacent about it. The moment you become complacent in this space, bad things will happen for the reasons that I've just indicated to you. So again, we have to constantly be moving against complacency. So lastly, let me just simply say in the last few minutes, this is a matter of boardroom to basement. Every part of every institution must be engaged in the core business that is safeguarding. The second thing is we have to build up a community of knowledge where students, teachers, parents are in fact involved in the same knowledge and understanding of the issue. And that is an ongoing process. It's age appropriate for children. It's responsive to the various needs, aspirations of parents groups, including more conservative parents. But at the end of the day, we have to have an inclusive community of knowledge which has a deep understanding of these issues, not only that there's a policy sitting somewhere in some desk. And that is the critical issue if we're going to make headroads in this. And the last point that I would make, it is a sacred duty. The mission and vision of the church, the mission and the vision of every one of the Catholic institutions represented here, at its very heart has the dignity not of all people alone, but especially of those most vulnerable. So for me in the Catholic Church, as I would say to the Anglicans and the Uniting and the Orthodox, is that this is more than a civil obligation. It's an obligation that goes to the very heart of who we are, what we believe in, what we value, and who we value. At every level, from the National Commission down, has to work out a way by which the voices of children, and the voices of children who are now adults who are abused, is heard, listened to, and acted upon, if we're really going to do justice to those that have come before. But again, I lastly say thank you. I just want to say thank you to all of you who have been involved in this journey. It's tough, and it's a journey for which there will be no, George Bush standing up saying, mission accomplished. That's not going to happen. The safety and well-being of vulnerable people is a never-ending challenge and journey. So if you think you've heard about safeguarding for the last time, sorry. What I am saying to you, however, what we have done, what we are doing, what you have done and what you are doing matters. And on behalf of the Australian Society, I thank you. Thanks very much.